Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Comms Coffee Club live webinar. We are specialising on communications in the Middle East today, and it's with great pleasure to introduce Mike Evans and Elizabeth Maclean, who are the co-managing directors of Herdwick Communications, a strategic comms and reputation management consultancy they co-founded last year. They both have enjoyed a fairly long career in communications, and both Mike and Elizabeth have been in the Middle East for a number of years, working both in-house and agency side. And Mike's coming up to 22 years, and Elizabeth has done 19. So, yeah, absolute pleasure to have you here, Mike and Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Max. Great to be with you. And look forward to the conversation with everybody.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. And yeah, kind of should be a good session. So just a couple of sort of housekeeping bits and bobs. Kind of just whilst we wait for everyone to join. So we will be working through some questions during the session. And whether you've joined either on StreamYard or LinkedIn or any of the other streaming platforms, you will have the ability to put any questions that you might have for Mike and Elizabeth in the comments box. We do have some time scheduled after the questions to go through a formal Q&A. But please, if you do have any questions that sort of do pop up at any point during one of their and during one of their responses, please do pop it in the comment box. And we will get around to it during the Q&A session. So yeah, it's just gone 2 minutes past 1 here in the UK. And thanks to everyone who's joined both from the Middle East and the US. It's great to have you here. I'll just give everyone another 30 seconds or so to join, and then we will get straight into it. And we'll just kick off in about 10 seconds. So, question number 1, Mike and Elizabeth. What advice would you give to a PR practitioner with responsibility for the Middle East? Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll take that question, Max, and thanks for the introduction, and hello to everybody joining us. I know we've got an audience joining us from across the world. But my advice would be to take time to understand the history of the region by just undertaking some desktop research. But if you do have the opportunity to visit, then do so. There's nothing like first-hand experience, and you will find it enriching. It will open your eyes. We talk about the Middle East as a collective, but each of the countries have their own culture and dynamics. But at the end of the day, this is no different to talking about Europe and not taking time to understand each of the countries individually. For example, it's important to understand the dynamics and different cultures in KSA to the UAE, as if you were comparing France to Poland. Mike, do you want to add anything to?
Yes, and hello everyone. I'd like to say a big hello as well, and thank you for joining us. To add to Elizabeth's point, it's all about the cultures, and anybody who's worked in international markets will realize that every country is different and every country has its own flavor. I think the critical thing to remember is that your communication principles are exactly the same no matter where they are in the world. You know, that base training that you have and the way you approach in a methodical and logical way is exactly the same regardless of wherever you are. One of the things I would say as well is that that the audiences in the Middle East can be quite different, and have different sort of viewpoints, and that they're quite fragmented as well. So, for example, when you're looking at a UAE market, you're not looking at one, you're looking at several. You're looking at Emiratis, you're looking at expatriate communities, and it's worthwhile doing the research to understand those audiences and the regulations around how you would deal with those audiences as well, so that there's no surprises. It's not different than anywhere else. Except apart from you would have a broader expat community than you would in most places, which may mean that your communications are targeted slightly differently.
Yeah, and just on those cultural differences, we don't have time to go into all of them, of course, but have you got one or two examples of how that might differ across the region?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it from a perspective of the UAE as a market, which is one that both Elizabeth and I are very familiar with, if you're as promoting products, let's say flight products or travel products, to an Emirati community, it would be very different than if you were doing it from an expatriate community who may be more looking for travel to go home, a once-a-year trip, an escape to find other places around the region. Whereas if you're looking at sort of an Emirati community, it might be more about business travel. It might be more about where they would take their family on holiday, etc. So, and how you would target them is obviously very different. The different communities have very different media landscapes, and Elizabeth will touch on that a little later when it comes to actually looking at the media itself.
And in light of recent events in the region, is that approach still applicable? Yes.
Yeah, it is. I think in light of recent events, it makes you think about communications in a broader sense. But regardless of wherever you are geographically these days, if you're going to launch a communications campaign, you must always have a crisis communications plan to go along with it. You know, environments change very quickly today. The environment changes very quickly, and you need to assess whether you would continue your communications, change them slightly, or look at how you would approach them differently. A good example of this would be a few years ago. I was working with one of the UAE carriers, and who flew to Ethiopia. And Ethiopian Airlines had a tragic air accident. And at the time, that airline that I worked for was running advertising campaigns and activity in the market. Quickly, we withdrew the advertising. We changed the tone of what was happening because it was just not appropriate in that market to be communicating those kind of things. Nor did you want to have your ad, which was go on holiday, have a wonderful time, next to a picture of an aircraft which had just crashed. So no matter where you are, I think if you're launching a campaign or you're launching communications activities, you need to be fully aware of what is going on around, and you need to make sure that you are fast of foot and that you can move quickly and actually put things in place that mitigate the risks that could be associated with your communications. I know Elizabeth's got some thoughts on that as well.
Well, I was going to say, if you look at it in terms of James Grunig's PR theory, which I'm sure lots of people are familiar with, performing that environmental spanning role by looking at what's going on outside, and interpreting that for your internal stakeholders aligns to the company and the insights that you have by working for the company. But you need to use it as an early warning system, as Mike said, for issues to allow your company to manage future risks. But at the end of the day, wherever you are in the world, PR is a strategic discipline, and you should have a seat at the decision-making table. I know that some recent research that the CIPR's done showed that actually there were only 3 PR directors in the FTSE 100 who had a seat at that table. So I do think that our industry needs to do more and to go further. I mean, here in the region, we've got a large communications community, and a lot of my colleagues are sitting in the boardroom, but we need to see more of that.
And when it comes to and when it comes to some of those crises and that sort of crisis communications, just thinking about everything that's going on at the moment, as a corporate, should you be articulating a position in the Middle East?
Well, that's a very interesting one. And I think what we need to bear in mind is we're dealing with commercial entities. We're not dealing with political organizations. So if you do decide to form a voice on a situation that is occurring, you need to understand why you're doing it. If you haven't got a clear reason to participate, then question. Also, if you do have a reason to participate and you have a reason where you feel you need to put your voice across, then you need to scenario plan what the implications are for you, for your customers, for your staff, for your investors, and for your stakeholders, a broader group. You need to know exactly what could happen so you can plan against it or plan to mitigate any risks that sort of come from this. If you remain silent, that's also a statement in itself. And again, you need to think about the implications of what you're doing, but know your motivations, agree them clearly, and then execute them based upon that plan. The other risk that you've got as well is that you've got staff who are based across the region who have views and who have opinions. And they can inadvertently often speak on behalf of the organization, especially in social media. And that can lead to situations where they come under attack verbally or in social, or that they suddenly feel threatened, and also can put the organization in a position that it really does not want to be in. And we would therefore advocate having strong social media guidelines in place that would identify what the rules are that a member of staff can talk about and how they position themselves against the company. And it's not really to keep them quiet, it's to make sure that they could be protected so that they don't come to harm. A recent example that I saw of this was during the wildfires in Greece this summer. There was one airline who was working hard to try and get everybody home, but there was lots of frustration with passengers, and a member of staff sort of jumped onto this social debate and said, hold on a minute, you're being totally unfair. I've not seen my husband in 4 days. It's just completely unfair. And this member of staff got completely destroyed online. And it's having the knowledge to give to your staff of the exposure that they can put themselves in, and also the view and perceptions they can give of the company. Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, that there are probably some scenarios that many practitioners won't face that we will face here on a day-to-day basis. But I'm sure some colleagues may have a view on that, of course. But an example that Mike and I were involved in were some civil unrest situations with employees on the ground. Leaving the media relations and the family assistance side to one side, and if we just focus on the internal communication side, we were in the scenario where there were employees on the ground, there was civil unrest, but we did communicate to colleagues that the colleagues were there, the situation was unstable, but we did provide regular updates, and then we were able to communicate that those colleagues had been safely evacuated. But we faced a similar situation in a different country, but it was very volatile. And in order that there was not a risk to those employees that were on the ground and teams were working to evacuate them, we didn't communicate to other colleagues to ensure that there was no risk until they reached safety. But then we did provide communications to colleagues to say that they had been evacuated safely. So I think, as Mike said earlier, it's important that you think about all the scenarios that you could face in your own communications plans. Do that thinking ahead of time, but you do need, as in any situation, You need to be ready to adapt and respond to the situation on the ground.
Very true.
Yes. Would you almost have segmented employee groups for your communications by country in the Middle East? How do you how do you normally put that plan together?
Yeah, I mean, you need to really look at all of your stakeholder groups and then to understand the dynamics within that. Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Max.
I mean, just to I think it's more about, not so much about the messaging, but it's about how you actually communicate with that audience. And you might find if you've got a community which is heavily operational and you can easily talk to them, then town halls are much more appropriate than maybe an email, which they won't see whilst they're working. So I think it's more about the message. The message needs to be consistent and clear, but how you deliver it needs to be tailored very much to those stakeholder groups.
Sure. Now moving on to the next question, specifically talking about campaigns in the region, what considerations should you take into account when planning one?
Well, I think for me, planning and preparing is key to success, as in anywhere in the world. But having that understanding of the market, having a mutual dialogue with your audiences, but you do need to take into account any legal and cultural frameworks within your own communications plans that are applicable to those respective markets. I think that, we've talked about your audiences, but in a role that I previously held, for example, I didn't always have the opportunity to visit a country where I might be launching operations. But what I did do is, where technical teams might go in advance, I used to brief them on my requirements. So though they weren't communications experts, but they did quickly learn over time as to the types of things that we were interested in. I did brief them on our requirements so that they could share some insights, and then they would come back and brief me, and I would build that into our communications plan. And that definitely helped, where there might not always be the opportunity to visit a market ahead of any planned launch.
I also think if you, as individuals, we have views of how things are done. And I think it's very important as communications practitioners in the region that rather than looking at our own personal view or stance or moral imperative for these actions, we follow the brand values of the organization that we adopt. And I think that's a principle when you're to any country, that you're not necessarily au fait with the culture. So stick to your corporate values, take the regulation as a framework, as the rules of the game, the box that you're going to operate within, and then put your campaign together as you would anywhere else. Be very clear about the objectives, set metrics around the success, so it's clear to everybody what is going to be achieved from this. You may not find that the standard tools that you have in sophisticated markets like the US and the UK are available to you, but there are alternatives. Explore those alternatives, find out what.
Oh, have we just lost Mike slightly there?
I wonder.
Yeah. And just whilst oh yeah, he's back.
Okay.
Sorry, Mike. Yeah, yeah. And we just lost you there for a second. Yeah. And do you have a couple of good examples of what those differences sort of might be for people, who are more used to a more established sort of market in the UK or the US, where
I mean,
there are different rules and regulations.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at, for example, rules of operation in a country like the UAE, you couldn't showcase alcohol. There, in part of the communications, there are certain parameters where, in certain parameters, they're much more lax than they would be in Europe in terms of maybe some of the data protection laws. They're getting tighter than they are today. but you almost use your principles that you've got within the markets that you come from, apply them. And if you hadn't, so for example, if you're running a campaign in Oman, let's say, you may not necessarily have the data and the auditing of the results that you would get in maybe the UAE or even Saudi Arabia, or maybe it's too expensive for you to purchase at those market levels. So you need to work with the teams on the ground to work out what success looks like. Is that sales? Is it drive to the website? Is it footfall? They will have a very clear view as to what they are trying to achieve, and then try and make those measures fit to it. Don't necessarily use the standard measures that we would have in the UK. And if you don't have anything available, there is always something that you can use that will give you a level of success.
Yeah, sure. And that actually moves quite nicely on to our next question around what are the pitfalls to be avoided for practitioners who are entering the market for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, Mike said that what might work in one market may not work in another, but equally don't come into the market thinking you know it all. I think take time to understand the market, talk to your colleagues, and speak to people on the ground. So I think you can bring your experience and your knowledge, but also do take time to understand the market dynamics.
Sure. I think it's also important as well that we don't translate activities that we do elsewhere in the world into the region. You need to Arabize your content. You need to not translate directly from English. It's just not going to work. Not going to work at all.
Why won't it work?
Well, for example, when we used to write some communications, that you could specifically, I think Mike and I know one of the challenges was always headlines. You could write a headline in English, but it might not work in Arabic, and you may use different words, and the emphasis may be slightly different, but the meaning would be the same, but perhaps in the way that if you read it literally in Arabic and compared it to the English, they would be different, but it would get you the coverage that you would want. But we used to spend a lot of time debating about headlines, and to make sure that there was that subtlety, which I think is all important, especially when you're looking to get coverage in the market for the company that you represent at the end of the day.
I mean, a great example of this is something very, very simple that we would say in the Western world, a return fare for air travel. Now, in Arabic, if you literally translate it, it is an air ticket with a seat that will take you to a destination and back from a destination. So if you were to literally translate the meaning of it, you would end up with copy that sort of filled the screen. So that's that sort of Arabization, and also the cultural nature, humor, for example, humor that we may think is amusing in the UK doesn't necessarily translate if you put it into Arabic. You do need to have good people on the ground who are very competent Arabic speakers, and not just the traditional Arabic, localized Arabic, regionalized Arabic, slang Arabic, because each of it is slightly different, and each country is slightly different as well, if it's a Lebanese form or a very formal Emirati form, and also understanding which is appropriate to which audience. So you don't want to talk to a bunch of people who are very hip and trendy and very traditional Arabic. They will instantly switch off. So the Arabization is very important.
And you can do that by building a glossary. We would advise people to prepare a glossary, take soundings, as Mike said, from different Arabic speakers, and then agree a corporate glossary that you can use in your written communications. And that needs to be adapted, obviously, for channels, because what you might write in a press release against how you would communicate in social, and then internally it needs to be reflected across all your channels. Sure.
And then moving on to our next question, is media relations in the Middle East different? Can you share some insights based on your experience?
Yeah, just take time to talk a little bit about the media landscape. They have pan-Arab publications. So, for example, one of the main newspapers, probably the most famous, is a publication called Ashak al-Awsat. It's comparable to the FT, but rather than being printed on pink pages, it's printed on green pages. The newspaper is actually headquartered in London, but it's printed around the world. It's syndicated with the Washington Post and has been with the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times. So the Pan-Arab publications are available across the world. They are broadsheets and very influential. We have both Arabic and English language newspapers in each country. Here in the UAE, one of the first newspapers that were published is now publishing for the first time only last week an edition in English. Some of the content is being translated, but there's also exclusive content, including interviews that are not necessarily available in the Arabic version. It is possible to build a relationship if you're not an Arabic speaker with the journalists working for the Arabic publications, but as they do speak English, fortunately, even if one doesn't have the language skills, but you do need to provide the content in Arabic, and that comes back to some of the points we've just discussed. You shouldn't forget the online editions. They have large readerships, and you can view, I would advocate taking time to read these newspapers online, that they're all available. Even if you can't necessarily read the copy, get a feel for them, and so that you can understand, you can see the types of things that they're focused on, including infographics. There's a lot of the newspapers have spent a lot of money on developing infographics, and that gives an opportunity for you as a PR practitioner to work with them. TV is also very important, probably one of the most important mediums. They've got a lot of business-focused programs. Even if you're an English speaker, you can go on to the Arabic channels and they'll provide simultaneous translation. So, for example, CNBC Al Arabiya, so that provides opportunities and forums for if you've got senior executives visiting the region. These are opportunities that you can build into your communications plan. We have, again, established radio networks with multiple languages. ARN, which is a big station here, it's about 10 different channels in Arabic and English, but we've also got Tagalog, Farsi, Malayalam. So there really is, through the different stations, an opportunity to speak directly to your target audiences. And I've done many press trips looking at really segmenting, having the opportunity to segment the audience, and really found it delivering great results for any campaign we've won. Sorry, Max.
No, sorry, no. And I was just going to say, and just tapping into those journalists, I noted, and you mentioned, sort of most of them do speak English, so even if you don't necessarily speak Arabic yourself, but making those relationships, do they prefer meeting people in person? Is a lot of it done online? Is it emailed, press releases? Do they pick up bits and bobs from LinkedIn, Twitter? Be interesting to know. Yeah.
All of the above. I mean, obviously, the depth of those relationships can be built over time, and obviously they'd last longer if they've been developed in person. But so having a team on the ground is obviously more beneficial, depending on what your setup is and how your teams are structured.
Sure.
I mean, I definitely said to say that the relationship side of things is vitally important. The other thing as well to bear in mind is, because many people, I guess, on this call are sort of Europe, North America based, remember the time difference between the region, and you might find that you're getting requests on what is a traditional sort of Western weekend. The UAE has the same weekend as Europe and North America, but Saudi doesn't, and other parts of the region are different too. So you might find that the demands on you as a practitioner, you need to be more flexible and more responsive outside of normal working hours to be able to respect their deadlines.
Sure. Moving on to the next question. Go on. Sorry, Liz.
A couple of other points I'll just mention, because looking at some of the participants that we've got on the call, I mean, there is a small specialist media here by sector. If you use a media database such as viewpoint, you can produce all of those lists. So there is some specialist media if you want to target them. There are obviously the international media also have bureaus here, such as the BBC, FT, and CNN. All have got bureaus here, either here in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi. There's a lot of money. The media houses have spent a lot of money on some state-of-the-art studios here, but the newsrooms, as Mike was mentioning, are under pressure, as in the rest of the world. So I think that there are some challenges to that. There was a time when newspapers weren't audited, but this is not now the case, and all the readership, listener, viewer numbers are audited, so you can build that into any metrics, and with some level of confidence.
Sure, super. Now moving on to the next question. What considerations are there if you want to roll out a broader marketing communications campaign across the region?
Well, when I was sort of in my previous role in house, the one thing I did was got a law firm appointed to actually give me up-to-date information on the regulation in each market, because it changes and it moves quite quickly. So we needed to keep abreast of what was going on in those markets, so that you didn't compromise any of the laws. And that wasn't just for the Middle East, that was for Europe as well. I think another thing to bear in mind as well is that in some parts of the Middle East, you might find that the regulation is less tight in terms of customer data and customer regulation than it is in parts of Europe. And the advice I would say is stick to your most stringent market and apply it to all of them, because otherwise you can find that your communications can sometimes become undermined, or you could make mistakes in other markets. It's a simplicity rule more than anything else. And the other thing I would actually say is, when you're rolling these campaigns out and thinking about the campaign activity, is understand the regulation, understand the market, understand your audience, but also use a little bit of common sense. I remember a while ago back, there was a campaign that was run in the UAE market where it was advertising Greek islands, and the person who was designing the campaign and working behind the campaign was a UK national, and they understood the regulation and about the use of religious symbols. And what they'd done is done an ad campaign with a beautiful picture of a Greek island with churches on it, and what they'd done is photoshopped out all the crosses on top of the churches. So not only did they upset the Greeks, they upset all sorts of different groups of people. And really, it's just using a little bit of common sense and thinking about it. There are many other shots that you could have used, and there are many other ways of describing those islands. So just use common sense. Don't be so restricted on it.
Super. Just going to cherry pick a couple of these last questions just before we get into the Q&A session. So I think briefly it'd be quite good to understand what three words you would each use to describe the time you spent in the Middle East.
Well, shall I go first? I'd say dynamic, innovation, and opportunity for me. I don't know what Mike will say.
I'd go for principled, unique, and relationship-led. I know that's 2 words, but I've hyphenated it to make it.
Yeah. I think that can count. Yeah. Okay. Nice. Super. And then kind of just before we get into the questions, what would you like participants to take away from today?
I'd like people not to look at the region using stereotypes, but come with an open mind.
Yeah. And I'd say lazy practitioners won't last here. You need to come with your toolkit and your arsenal of communications competence and actually use it at its best, because it's a place of opportunity, but you've got to work really hard and be very good at what you do to make a mark here.
Got it. Thank you very much. Right, let's move on to the Q&A section. So if everyone could just start adding their questions to the comment section, that would be great. And then I will start to see them. And then I'll be able to add them to the screen. And in the meantime, just whilst kind of we're waiting for those to come through, I'm actually going to ask you a question, Elizabeth, just off the back of what you said around some of those sort of lazy stereotypes in the region. Can you give us a couple of examples and perhaps a bit of a counter argument to them?
Well, I could say that let me have a think. Stereotypes. I mean, actually, I sort of, if I reflect on my time here, and I've much enjoyed working here. I mean, I've also lived in the Far East and in Europe, but I think I have a much broader international outlook, and I think I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier. About saying don't come here, think you know it all. I mean, there's a huge amount of innovation here. There's some very good best practice, and I think it is a dynamic market, and I've learned a lot by working here, and I think that is, I guess, those values are really what I'm alluding to. I think it's been I have no regrets about coming here. My only regret probably is that I didn't learn Arabic. I did recently tot up the number of words that I can say in Arabic. I'm sure my friends who are Arabic speakers will not comment on my linguistic skills, but I've learned one word for the 19 years that I've been here. But I do regret that I didn't take time. I didn't know I was going to be here also for 19 years because the time has gone very quickly. But I do regret not learning to speak Arabic. And I think if I had my time over again, I would actually take the time. It's obviously needs quite a amount of effort and commitment to learn to speak Arabic. And I'm glad to see more and more people choosing to learn to speak Arabic. And I think that that would be, if I had my time again, I would do that. And I think perhaps the experience would be slightly different.
Great.
Because of the benefits by speaking the language come to.
Yeah, and there's just a quick sort of follow-up question on that actually, from Michael Osborne, which I'll just pop on the screen. Oh, sorry, Mike, I've completely covered you up. It's a long question.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'll pop it on for about 10 seconds. So let's just pop straight to the question bit. So do you think there's anything different about culturally embedding in the Middle East versus the Far East or continental Europe? Because I note, and Elizabeth, you mentioned around, sort of having worked globally as well. So just, kind of maybe some of those differences, if there are any.
I guess maybe, having worked in the Far East, I'd say obviously the one, and I haven't worked there actually for a while, but obviously the loss of face in the Far East is something that one should be very much aware of. I think the market here is probably quite respectful and polite. And I'm not sure that perhaps in the UK and Europe, I'd like to think that we still have those values. So I think they would be, just reading Michael's question to see whether I'm answering it fully. So I think they would be the sort of cultural nuances that I would consider.
Super. And now we've got a question from Patrick Pearson. I'll pop it up on screen. So does made in MENA tag help or hinder with a foreign brand?
That's an interesting one, really, because I guess it depends on the motivations why the product is made in MENA. If it's from a sustainability perspective about local market distance to consumer, then I think there's a lot of mileage in it. I guess you're also looking at lots of markets within MENA, and you might find that it means something to a Saudi who lives in Saudi, who have a product who's made in Saudi, but may not necessarily mean the same thing as a product made in Saudi for somebody who's consuming in Oman. So I think you'd have to look at the motivations for why you were actually producing that item in the country itself, and actually build upon those motivations rather than trying to retrofit it. There may be completely the opposite. If it's a luxury good, let's say it was a Louis Vuitton something or other that was very much chosen because it was an Italian-made brand or what have you, you may actually disengage that market from it, because there is a level of conspicuous consumption in certain segments within the market, especially in the higher end. But I think I would look very closely at the motivations for why you're producing that in the MENA region, and then actually build upon those motivations as part of the communications. Got
it. Thank you very much. Next question is from Cindy Evans. Is opportunity available for practitioners of all ages? Cindy is particularly interested in your views about more experienced and older people.
I'd say that there's actually a shortage of very senior PR practitioners here in the region. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity across the region. I think practitioners that have got experience in reputation management, investor relations, crisis communications, I think that there is a shortage of those disciplines here. And so I think that does provide opportunities if you have that skill set.
And you bear in mind the culture as well is very much respects age and respects wisdom and respects knowledge that comes from experience. So especially if you're advising CEOs, they want you to have had that experience to be able to give them context.
Yes, and just on the technical side of things as well, as far as I'm aware, particularly in the UAE, Saudi, for expats moving over there is not overly complex, and lots of companies will pay relocation, etc. If you've got children, there's often school funding, etc. too. So yeah, they do like to try and attract people from the UK and US. I don't know whether that's changed at all, Michael, Elizabeth, but
no, I think that still stands. I mean, some of the benefits are changing. I know some firms don't give you a salary that includes all of the benefits. Some employers, depending on their terms and conditions, break it down to housing, as you say, schooling, medical, and then a sort of base salary. So it depends on the structure of the company that you're working on.
It can be a very easy place to live, and that can be facilitated very easily by the company that you work for.
Yeah, sure. And do people generally still tend to live in the expat sort of communities, or is it more spread out now around sort of the cities, etc.?
Well, I think the UAE is growing, as is in Saudi. So I think there are. It really depends on what your circumstances are, but I think the there is such tremendous growth and huge development. I mean, on a recent visit to Saudi, I really couldn't believe, and I hadn't been there that long prior to that visit, and the amount of development and the pace at which it's growing, it really is noticeable. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for people.
Yes, I mean, I know it's only mentioning one company, but if you look at Aramco's career site and the amount of communications roles, you know, kind of there are actually based out in Saudi and specifically targeting people from Western countries. Yeah, there's an enormous amount of investment going in there. So, super. Yeah. So next question from Jeannie Dumas. You mentioned developing a glossary of words and phrases. Is there something that you can share with attendees?
I mean, the way I would approach that is if you've got a corporate glossary, and then look to Arabize that so that it is aligned. But I think if you don't have a glossary, look at perhaps your key messages, some of the words that you use in your corporate vocabulary, create a glossary, and then Arabize that.
I mean, it's interesting actually, because we're running a workshop tomorrow for a company in the UAE, and we're updating their glossary of terms. So it's very industry specific, and it's very channel specific, and it's very much based around what they're trying to achieve. So, for example, we're looking at how they would phrase things in social media, press release, advertising, internal communications, and maybe corporate messaging. And so we look across the glossary of terms across all of those different points. And first of all, we agree the principles in English, and then we debate them in Arabic, and then have a look, is the Arabic translation a better version of how we could describe the word? So it's an iterative process, and those words are very much based around the brand values. So, you know, there isn't necessarily a glossary of terms we could turn around and say, here you go. It's very industry specific, and tomorrow we're probably going to develop phraseology and wordings for probably 6 different channels and probably 150 different words. So it's very unique.
But I think just to make getting an opinion on once you Arabize it, getting second, third, fourth opinions. As Mike mentioned, there are different. There's classical Arabic, there's the regional dialects, and really getting at that consensus. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, super. Yeah, and just on that point, I think you mentioned it several times earlier around having boots on the ground, local speakers in each country, and I think you also mentioned, didn't you, not just the traditional Arabic, but yes, for the more sort of hip markets, if that's the right word, having some Arabic slang as well. So
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And Arabic slang sounds fun. Great. So we've got another question from Patrick Pearson here, and actually just a really interesting one. So I'll pop this one back up on screen. So with the Saudis now insisting on overseas companies having a regional HQ in Riyadh, is there a shift towards indigenous Saudi Arabian media and against wider Pan-Gulf media that is published in the UAE? Very interesting question. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, each country has its well-established media, and Saudi's got a very well-established and large number of publications. As I mentioned earlier, there are the Pan-Arab publications. I mean, Ashak Al-Awsat actually is a Saudi publication. It's just headquartered in London, but they have a bureau here in Dubai as well. So they are, I mean, in country, you will consume your local media, but that's why I think the Pan-Arab publications are so important, because they do go across, it does go across the region. The television stations, we have our own local stations, but then we have the stations that you can consume across the region as well. So I think they should both be built into any media list that you have, and you target it depending on your story and the emphasis that you're looking for. I hope that answers the question from Patrick.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Is there, I guess, just follow up for me on that, is there, I know you mentioned targeting local media, but are there any sort of inter-country sort of slight tensions at all that you have to bear in mind in terms of that approach to sort of media and conducting your sort of communications across the region?
No, I think if you're running a campaign across the Middle East, you can target Saudi publications, UAE publications, Kuwait, etc., and then you can build in your pan-Arab publications and by media outlet, be it a newspaper, be it a broadcast or outlet. So I think that you need to have a comprehensive media list, but there's no issue with putting out a press release in across the region. I think most companies would be doing that as part of their, depending if they're an international firm with that international footprint. That I think would be generally, in my previous roles, we worked with journalists in all of the markets.
Yes, yeah.
There might be a slight difference with that with advertising. Well, there is a difference with advertising in terms of using Saudi styles of Arabic as opposed to UAE styles, and you need to be very clear about that. But it's not dissimilar to advertising in France and using Swiss French. You've just got to make sure that you're tonally and linguistically correct in whichever market you're going to.
Got it. Thank you. And then another one from Michael Osborne as well, actually. I'm just going to put the last bit of the question because, he accidentally typed half of it out. So he said, to begin with, moving out sounds easy. How easy or challenging is it moving back to the UK? And perhaps maybe this is going back to some of the sort of stereotypes you talked about, Elizabeth, earlier. Is there still prejudice against MENA experience when coming back?
Well, because I do spend some time back in the UK, I think Michael's. I use my experience that I've gained from living and working here for nearly 20 years. So in just thinking where perhaps questions have been posed to me about the region, I can answer those based on my own personal experiences and insights, and I hope that therefore looks to move the needle on some of those stereotypes.
I think I'd also say as well that you live many careers when you live and work out in the Middle East, because the market moves so fast, and the things that you get to do during that period is 3 careers. And as crisis managers and reputation management specialists, the things we have been involved in over those 20 years are broad and quite insightful. We're one of a handful of practitioners around the world who've had to deal with a tragic air accident and the communications around it. The things you get exposed to are push your capabilities as a practitioner. And it comes back to that point I made earlier. If you're lazy and you want to make a quick buck, you're going to leave fast, because you've got to be competent and capable. And if you want to come back to the UK, hopefully the first time you open your mouth and you discuss a scenario that somebody puts in front of you, they will realize that you've got the skill and the competence based on those 3 simultaneous careers that you've just lived.
Yeah, no, really interesting points. And actually, I think if any of some of the answers to the questions today you know, showed, it's a complex region with lots of different things to take into account, and in many respects, yeah, probably a little bit harder than if you just had a UK or Western brief. Yeah, even the slight sort of nuances in different forms of Arabic, etc., from country to audience is, not something we always have to quite take into account as much here. So,
well, and I think
really
I'd
good
say
answer.
I'm a better practitioner for the experiences that I've had for working here, as I am from the other parts of the world that I've been privileged to work in. So I would encourage though people that haven't had the opportunity to work overseas, and I know it's not possible for everybody, but if you do have the opportunity to work abroad, I've really benefited and enjoyed the experiences. So
Sure, super. Well, look, yeah, I'm conscious of time. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of firstly say thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mike. It's been absolutely great having you on today. Yeah, I've certainly learned some things that I had absolutely no idea about in the Middle East.
well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, hopefully everyone else on the call has got some really good bits to take away with them. In terms of follow-up, obviously, I will send a follow-up email to everybody, and I'll include your contact details in there, Mike and Elizabeth. But yeah, just for everyone on the call now, where's the best place to find you? Where's the best place to contact you?
I are both on LinkedIn, and feel free to connect with us. And we've also got our website, which is just herdwickcommunications.com. So our contact details are on the website.
Just one point that I've just seen another question that's sort of come through, and so somebody's talking about if you're nearing 60 and the visa limits. Yes, there is a limit if you are getting close to 60. However, that, like most things in life, can be extended. So if you do find an employer who is interested in you as an individual, then they can always get exceptions for it. And it may mean that your visa is renewed on an annual basis or on a shorter period. However, there are exceptions to all of these things. So don't be deterred if you are getting closer to 60. The experience can often outweigh that.
Super. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
And really great questions, actually.
Yeah, really super questions.
Really thought-provoking. So thank you for everybody for those.
Yes, yeah, and thank you from me as well to everybody who has tuned in. And yes, as I said, I will send a follow-up email to everybody with everyone's contact details for me, Mike and Elizabeth, and also there'll be a little follow-up survey in there as well. So yeah, if you could let us know your thoughts, that would be fantastic. And yeah, thank you for tuning in today. And yeah, thank you very much for all of your questions as well. They've been really thought-provoking. So yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, look forward to speaking and hearing from you all again soon. Cheers, Mike and Elizabeth. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And yeah, and enjoy. Well, it'll be the end of your afternoon now, won't it? So yeah, enjoy your evening.
Many thanks, everybody. Many thanks, Max, for organising it. It was great discussion.
Cheers, guys. No worries. Thank you.